welcome back. Still watching Business Morning here on Channels Television. We're still looking at Nigeria's economy, and especially after that, well, do we say impressive number from NEPC, the non-oil export? But the other aspect is perhaps some factors affecting those exports at this time, and it's the global trade war. That's no longer news. President Trump has been dishing it out to us. Nigeria, for instance, has 14%. But let's find out, you know, how much impact it's having on the Nigerian economy with the Managing Director of Capital Plus Limited, Mr. Oluwaseyi Odufoya, right here in the studio. Mr. Odufoya, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Trump has been trumping the world. But I mean, even the WTO yes. DG talked about this, and she seemed to be more optimistic, at least for the African continent. So even though we have 10%, 14% from the continent.
This line.
Yes. The conversation is that this is an opportunity for Africa to look inwards. We have more than 1 billion markets within ourselves. How much of a trade do we do with the U.S., for instance? We saw China, Japan lower their currencies to make their exports cheaper and all of that. So doesn't this give us more of a good or some benefits than punishment?
Okay, so in my view, I remember the last time I was here, I made it very clear that a Trump presidency will have a lot of misgivings, you know, in global trade. You know, Trump is more of a bilaterally minded person, more than a multilaterally minded person. So he believes in transactions rather than growth, a global growth. So, and he campaigned for America first, you know, and that is what we are seeing today. This tariff war that we have seen globally is just a representative for those things that he wishes for the U.S. economy. We look at trade in general, we look at migration, and we should look at national security. And to be able to achieve all of those, there must be a global disruption. And that is what Trump is trying to do, just to place America first in every table of negotiations. And when he started with a baseline, like you mentioned, between 10 and 14% globally. But along the line, for those countries that he sees as more of a threat to the U.S., most especially China, and that's why you see that it rose as high as 145%, retaliatory measures at 225% in terms of tariff. But look at the African market. Like you asked, how much of this market affects, how much of the U.S. market affects Africa, and how much of African export goes to the U.S.? Before now, we know African presidents, we go cap in hand, most times to the U.S., IMF, World Bank, Paris Club, and every other multinational to beg for aid, to beg for funds, and that is what has stopped. I used to say that, in my own view, as an economist, tariffs is good. Global trade war is good. It's healthy. It's a healthy war because it makes you go back home and think outside of the box. It makes you to sit down and look at what are the cushions we have around us. If the U.S. is not there, if you are not trading with the U.S., what advantage, comparative advantage, do we have globally? And it makes you to begin to look inward in your own fiscal policies to grow your own economy. Nigeria as a country, what can we speak for ourselves at the moment? 90% of our FX earning from exports, FX export earnings is from crude. And that's why you will say that it may not really affect us, you know, going down the line. But look at this now. Our benchmark for crude is $75 per barrel. That's our benchmark. And that's what we use in basing our 49 trillion budget. And now, as we speak, it's about $63. So that deficit, that margin, how do we cover for it? Is it by more borrowings? Is it by taxing Nigerians more? Or is it by lowering government spending? How do we manage it? Because it will definitely affect on the long run. Look at now, the agri sector and non-oil producing sector is going to be affected. There's no doubt. Though, like I said, 90% of our earnings is based on crude, but it will be affected. And how will Nigeria come out of it? If I will go straight into that for the discussion, you know, the Minister of Trade and Investment must, you know, begin to think out of the box as we speak. You know, recently, Mr. President set up a committee to look at our trade policy. The last time it was reviewed was in 2002. So, you know, that lag has been there. So if not for the U.S., you know, disrupting global markets now, what are we going to be talking about? So for Nigeria as a country, I think, you know, for long-term solutions, we should look inwards. And in looking inwards, we must look at our fiscal policies. We must rejig it so that it can solve our problems. And the major problem...
What part of the fiscal policy?
I'll get there.
Okay.
So one of the major problems we have is production. Nigeria is not a producing economy. We are a mono economy, fully dependent on oil exports. And that's what we have. And I tell you, there are research that says that in the next 60 years, our wells may dry up. I'm not saying it's going to dry, may dry up. So where are we going to be looking at? Okay, probably now presidents that are coming in will say that it's not going to be my time. I will survive Nigeria and move forward. But what of the future of this country? So part of it, like I said, is production. How are we going? We must begin to produce. That is the solution. You know, we must industrialize Nigeria, and that's the only way to grow. We must begin to export, shift away from oil export to fully non-oil export. You know, once we have that balance, then we can grow. Now, look at our SME sector, about 58 to 59% of GDP. How well is it growing as we speak in terms of employment, in terms of creating effects, expanding, you know, spending? How are we growing? And to get it right, that's why I said fiscal policies. We must look at security. We must look at electricity. These are very, very vital areas that will, you know, propel growth by helping us to produce more. And, you know, anything apart from this will only be dependent. So once there's a volatility in the international market, it will affect Nigeria.
So what about those who say that what
Yes.
we should actually start with should be blocking the leakages? You talked about, you know, government adjusting its expenditure, even if it's for 2025, even though we already have our budget.
Yes.
When you look at that from that perspective, blocking the leakages, cutting down on expenditure, do you agree that that's we call it low-hanging fruit that we could handle or deal with at this time when crude oil prices are dwindling?
Well, I'll agree with you, and that's why I mentioned it, that where will government look at? Because the U.S. global tariff war is affecting oil prices as we speak. And lowering to 63, it may even come down further. And that's why IMF, World Bank, they've lowered their expectations in terms of growth all around the world. They've lowered it. Nigeria, our expectation for 2024 was to grow at 2.9%. We ended up growing at about 3.4%. I mentioned it here. And at the end of the day, now growth has been lowered again to about 2.9%, even though our budget benchmark for growth, GDP growth, is 4.6%. Super high, and I don't see how we want to meet up with that. And so, to look at it in context, you know, government spending, I will always advocate for governments to reduce its spending, but how much of it, in terms of percentage, will affect our growth if we want to look at it, you know, realistically. Government will always tell you, okay, we are going to reduce our salaries, but not total emolument, but they will say salaries, we are going to cut down on this, but in actual sense, how many governments have been able to do that holistically? What are they going to cut holistically? So if you say
what
don't
about ministries and agencies?
Well, if you want to cut down on that, well, I don't know how it will affect a government in its first term in office. You know what I mean? That's the political side. I'm not the politician, so I won't go there.
We're going to politics again.
No, I won't go into politics. But you know, as an economist, when we are looking at growth, we are looking at middle-term and long-term growth. But sincerely, what will give us a good standing and good shocks around global market is just going to be centered around, you know, our fiscal policy that we need to rejig. And by rejigging it, there are certain components that must be put in place fully. We can't joke with electricity if we want to grow.
But you see, the thing with this, I mean, these things you've talked about.
Yes.
Infrastructure.
Yes.
Insecurity.
Yes.
They seem to be long-term. And
yes.
for Nigeria, it's a conversation we've been having for a very long time.
True.
You know, so do you see things being different now? Well,
I'll say that Mr. President has been seen as taking the bull by the horn. He's a president that has the full balls to go all the way, and he has demonstrated it right from his emergence in 2023. And sincerely, the Nigerian market believes in his strides to give us that change that we desire. When he came in, total removal of fuel subsidy, I said total, because over time, you know, we've had it come back. So total removal of fuel subsidy, you know, floating of the Naira, it takes a lot of balls to be able to do that. And we found out that Naira gained its balance in the market at about 1,500, 1,600. And we already know that that is the real global exchange level, not as at when it was around 400.
So you think this 1,006 we're working with is the fair value of the Naira?
It's the fair value of the Naira. That is where Naira has come to stabilize. That is the equilibrium point.
Don't forget that a few weeks ago it was on 1,005.
No, that's what I'm saying. It fluctuates between that 1,516. It depends on global pressures too. So now that oil prices is dwindling, it will affect the Naira. Oil prices go up, Naira will balance. And that is what we are talking about, that Nigeria does not have internal shocks. We depend on the global market to survive because we are not a producing nation. And that's what I'm trying to go back to. So if you look at some of these policies, there's no two ways about it. You know, Peter Obi will always say that we must move from consumption to production. That is pure economics, and it's true. We must move to production, and if we do not produce, there's no way.
So do you see things being different now? Because we're talking about the capacity to produce, the infrastructure.
Let me start with electricity that I mentioned earlier. About 3 governments successively average at about 5,000 megawatts. As we speak, according to the Minister of Power, he has told us that Nigeria is currently on about 6,000 to 6,500. And before the end of the first tenure of this government, we should be running at about 8,000 megawatts, which is an increase. Imagine if every government adds about 1,000 megawatts to the national grid in the last 15 years. We should be talking of close to 30,000 megawatts right now. And for a good sustainability of electricity in this country, for SMEs to grow, we still need about 40 to 50,000 megawatts. So electricity must grow. And if government commits itself more into that sector, we should grow averagely. And if you have electricity, everybody is busy. It cures unemployment. It increases spending, local spending. And once spending is increased, it makes your economy more robust. And if you look at it, so if you add those two together, coupled with the fact that it will also curb insecurity at a level, because an idle hand is a devil's workshop. People will get to work, and there will be productivity across the country. And once there's productivity, it increases GDP. And so we must look at it. It's a chain. And once we begin to solve it directly, Nigeria will have a global benchmark. And once again, to the Minister of Trade, we need to begin to think outside of the box. Look at the AGOA agreement that we have with the U.S. How well have we used it?
That's expiring in September.
I know. Before now, how well did we use that window for export? You know, free duty, free everything. How well did we use that window?
Now we have AFCFTA.
Oh, yes. So if you look at it, Africa as in general may not suffer directly as we speak in this global tariff war, but Nigeria as an economy, because there are no shocks, because we have been idle for a very long time, there's no way it will affect us because we depend solely on oil for our foreign FX to come into the country.
So once again, we're talking about diversification.
Yes.
A message that we've been preaching for many, many years. But thank you so much, Managing Director, Capital Plus Limited, Oluwaseyi Odufuwa. Thank you for your time and your views.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.